Good afternoon, dear students. It's nice to be in your company, even if it's notional or virtual. I imagine myself to be so here, sitting here on my porch, and so that you don't have to look at my face all the time, I'd like to show you what I see over your shoulder, as it were, when I look out at you in my imagination. Here is the view from my porch, the view of our garden shed, and the trees that surround us. A very, very lovely view. So I want to consider with you again for a little while the wonders of our book, Tristram Shandy, and we picked up this past week at the moment when, more or less at the moment, when poor Dr. Slop is shown into the parlour in his unimproved condition, unwiped, unappointed, unannealed, as the ghost of Hamlet's father says to his son, with all his sins upon him, because he hadn't been able to have a communion, Roman Catholic communion, and in fact Shakespeare is quite right of a play set in the Middle Ages in Denmark that it should be a Roman Catholic version of the Christian religion, although in truth the cosmology of the play Hamlet is almost indecipherable. We cannot really grasp why a ghost walks from what appears to be more like hell than any other region of the afterlife, a dungeon, terrible fires, and why he's released to walk the earth until the dawn, like a vampire, is not decipherable by the light of any particular version of Christianity, other than Shakespeare's in the play Hamlet. Shakespeare maybe never had a very clear idea of what the Christian religion consisted of, having been raised in the paganism of the countryside himself. Somebody who knew very well what Christianity consisted of was Lawrence Sterne, our author here, and he gives us plenty of examples of it. But here we began with poor old Dr. Slop, unfortunately an embattled Roman Catholic at Shandy Hall in the company of stout Anglicans. And poor old Toby stands there like Hamlet's ghost. Hamlet is much on Sterne's mind at this stage of writing, and probably all the time, motionless and speechless for a full minute and a half at the parlour door. It's a very long time. Obadiah still holding his hand, with all, this is Dr. Slop, the majesty of mud. And it certainly seems that no mortal, as Tristram tells us, who had beheld Dr. Slop in that pickle, a pickle being in English, in British English anyway, a tricky situation, could have dissented from so much, at least of my Uncle Toby's opinion, that mayhap his sister, never mind a total stranger, his sister might not care to let such a Dr. Slop come so near her. 5 asterisks follow to tell us how close we have come to reading or speaking aloud the thing that was not appropriate to be mentioned. So they soon, these three worthies, well, 4 when Obadiah is with them and 5 when Trim is there, who are spending all their time picking nits out of absurdly frivolous and irrelevant subjects, even as poor Mrs. Shandy is undergoing the torments of the damned giving birth upstairs, about which the men are blissfully indifferent, and talking about issues to do with religion and the military. And so uh, uh, poor Walter complains to his brother that he would rather not have his head stuffed with military metaphors and military stories quite so fully. I declare, he says, I would not have my head so full of curtains and hornworks, both of which are terms for devices used in a military siege. Of course, this delights Dr. Slop, who, aside from being a stout, virtuous Roman Catholic, loves double entendres. He's not an innocent-minded man, and I'm sure the Anglicans present in this gathering would have argued that no papists are innocent of mind. Not that they themselves are, but about being having a head free of curtains and hornworks, that I dare say you would not, quoth Dr. Slop, interrupting him and laughing most immoderately at his pun. The pun involving curtains and hornworks, being, on the one hand, that curtains have something to do with bedsteads. The bed in Shandy Hall would certainly have had curtains around it to keep its inmates, its inhabitants, warm in the winter, rather than to keep prying eyes out. Actually, it's a real incitement to prying eyes, a bed surrounded with curtains. You really want to peep in, discover what's going on. As for horn works, needless to say, that is a direct sexual reference which delights Dr. Slop, whose business it is, of course, to minister to the consequences of horn work. And now the Anglicans, the Shandy brothers, draw themselves up to their full height and address Dr. Slop. The curtains, my brother Shandy mentions here, have nothing to do with bedsteads. The curtain, sir, is the word we use in fortification for that part of the wall or rampart which lies between two bastions and joins them. And so Toby's off again with his incredibly complicated military tales. For when a ravelin, brother, stands before the curtain, it is a ravelin, and when a ravelin stands before a bastion, then the ravelin is not a ravelin, it is a half-moon. A half-moon likewise is a half-moon and no more, so long as it stands before its bastion. But if it was to change place and get before the curtain, 'twould be no longer a half-moon. A half-moon in that case is not a half-moon, 'tis no more than a ravelin. And on he goes, intolerably. This is precisely what drives Walter round the bend, is the over-rich litany that accompanies his brother's obsessive accounts of military life. So there's a moment I wanted you to be at ease with. It's a very Sternian moment, the end of the very short chapter 3. There are shorter ones, but this one is pretty short. Chapter 3 in volume 3, where it's where his I imagine that, oh Lord, yes, it's when Uncle Toby discovered the transverse zigzaggery of my father's approaches to his handkerchief. This is a question I've asked you in the quiz to clarify, and it reminds Toby of a part of his military service. Consequently, he asks Trim to go, please, and fetch his map of Namur, the siege, so that he can clarify to himself the angles of an attack of which he's just been reminded. But Walter, thinking, oh, no, please not. My father knit his brows, and as he knit them, all the blood in his body seemed to rush up into his face. My Uncle Toby dismounted immediately. And then comes, unheralded, no introduction, the voice of a reader, an unspecified reader, saying, I did not apprehend your Uncle Toby was a horseback. Didn't know he was riding at this point. No, he's not riding, as Stern forbears to point out, trusts us to understand that dismounting, certainly for a military officer like Uncle Toby, simply means he got off his hobby horse and decided not to ask Trim to bring the map of Namur, which might have just started an enormously long disposition. So, apart from Toby's constant attempts to get people interested in the disposition of the armies, I was going to set out to enjoy with you a later passage, and I had intended to mark it, to mark the spot, and have now failed to do that. I think I might have been thinking about reading you the opening section where Tristram says, I have dropped the curtain over this scene for a minute to remind you of one thing and to inform you of another. What I have to inform you comes, I own, a little out of its due course, for it should have been told 150 pages ago, he says, even though we haven't got 150 pages, but that I foresaw then 'twould come in pat hereafter, and would have its place later, and be of more advantage here than elsewhere. Writers had need look before them to keep up the spirit and connection of what they have in hand, he says. When these two things are done, the curtain shall be drawn up again, and my Uncle Toby, my father, and Dr. Slop shall go on with their discourse without any more interruption. First, then, the matter which I have to remind you of is this, that from the specimens of singularity in my father's notions in the point of Christian names, and that other point previous thereto, you was led, I think, into an opinion. You was led is, which we would think should be you were led, is not necessarily a lower class or uneducated locution at this point in the 18th century, and it's almost a highfalutin, fancy way of saying you were led into an opinion, and I'm sure I said as much, that my father was a gentleman altogether as odd and whimsical in 50 other opinions. In truth, there was not a stage in the life of man, from the very first act of his begetting down to the lean and slippered pantaloon, another quote from Shakespeare, from As You Like It, where Jaques lists the ages of man, in his second childishness, but he had some favourite notion to himself, springing out of it, as sceptical and as far out of the highway of thinking as these two which have been explained. So there we have him alerting us to the bizarre nature of his father's meditations. And this one takes us, from the best accounts he'd been able to get of the matter of the infant's skull. He was satisfied that the danger could not be where Descartes had placed it, upon the top of the pineal gland of the brain. The pineal gland is a real gland in the brain, and if you wish to know more of its possibilities, you should read Hunter Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, where essence of pineal gland is one of the most exotic, if not the most exotic, of the drugs that our heroes in that novel take. So this is all part of a question that I've asked you, which is what exactly it is that so fascinates Walter about birth, and which has led him into such exquisite and complex researches. So enjoy, please, and even enjoy Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a great and extraordinary novel turned into a strange film with Johnny Depp playing our hero. It's not a terrible film, but it's an almost unfilmable book, which I recommend you with all my heart. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a kind of 20th century Tristram Shandy, maybe. Stay safe, my dears. Stay warm, it's getting cold. But above all, stay distanced. All the best till next time.